sound like something from a charlatan in Victorian-era medicine, but electricity can help heal your wounds, y'all.
You want to listen to whatever?
Hey everyone, I'm Trace. Thanks for tuning in to D News. That's what I said. Electricity can help heal wounds, and not in the androids of the future, or the Borg, or something, but right here, plain old meat bags. In 1791, Italian physician and philosopher Luigi Galvani took a dead frog and used small amounts of electricity to cause the frog's leg to twitch. He discovered muscles move with electrical contraction. Then in 1843, German physician Émile Dubois-Reymond founded the field of electrophysiology, the idea that the human body and other animal bodies have their own electrical properties. And since then, we've learned how animals have this web of electrical transmission lines extending throughout our systems into every nook and cranny of our bodies. More recently, scientists learned under the skin is a faint electrically ionized field running parallel to the surface at around 100 millivolts, and though you can't sense it, your cells can. When the body is wounded, the current changes course, running perpendicular to the skin instead of parallel. This is like an air raid siren for the cells of the body, signaling that the flesh needs help from the body's healers, platelets, white blood cells, proteins, you know. At the University of Aberdeen, researchers used very low-level electrical fields to help wounds heal and flesh regenerate 50% faster than letting it go on its own. The problem was, it was documented 150 years ago by Émile Dubois-Reymond. Over 150 years after these researchers discovered these electrical fields, Stanford scientists found that animal cells use these electrical fields to usher the repairman of the body toward a wound and the innocent bystander cells away from the danger zone. Danger zone! The cells rushing toward the wound have two little markers on them. One is pointing them toward the wound, like a compass that always knows where to go. The other is blocking out other electrical signals. This is kind of like a siren on an ambulance, but even better, and on a microscopic level. It's sort of similar. The cool thing is, even now, after hundreds of years of science, there is still a lot more stuff to find out about the inner workings of our body. Armed with this new knowledge, doctors may be able to develop bandages that use small electrical fields to draw healing cells to desired parts of the body and drive away those cells that they don't want to interfere with the healing process. They could also speed up tissue repair and regeneration, all with just a few millivolts.
Energy is the essence of life. That's a simplistic statement. It's talking about bioelectric fields, and again, that's kind of an esoteric way to look at things. We've talked about, though, electrophysiology forever. Electrical physiology. So we get wrapped up in the solid components of matter, cells, and what make up cells, and blood vessels, and all that. But when you get past the material, it's all about electrons and electricity. I have no commercial disclosures. The universe is made of energy mostly, and we're only aware of 5% of it, which is interesting. The other 95% is dark matter and dark energy, which means there's a lot of stuff we don't know. And what the universe is acting as a mirror to us. It doesn't give us what we want. It just reflects back to us what we are. So positive thinking sounds superfluous as well, but it's very powerful. In fact, when you look at something and observe it, you change it. Quantum physics teaches us that. There's a saying before most of our energy meetings, and let me just repeat this, please. We are one with the light and the love of the Creator from which we come. I stand before you as a witness to the divinity and power you carry within you. Let us join together to bring the highest level of personal and spiritual transformation possible for you at this time. I honor the earth and the sacred elements. I honor yourself, being, for bringing yourself forward with the intent to heal or transform. And so it begins. We live in an energy discordant environment. All electronic and electrical devices, the electromagnetic fields are everywhere. And we're learning about how to guard against that, both visually by wearing glasses like Dr. Lewis wears, and avoiding electromagnetic radiation when we sleep. Now, why does this matter? Your body has a voltage system with 4 battery packs. The muscles that we have, our musculoskeletal system, are 6 rechargeable battery packs that correspond exactly to the meridian fields that the acupuncturist told us about. And wrapped around the fascia like a little sock, wrapped around the muscle like a little sock is the fascia, which is a semiconductor. And electrons and energy travel the speed of light from one area of the muscle to another. It's usually a one-way street. The importance of that, not only that it allows electrons, electricity to travel quickly, is that when surgeons cut that, slice the fascia with their surgical procedures, you have disrupted your electrical field. Now, the second after the muscles, we have cell membranes. So you go down to all the musculature, and you get to the cells, trillions of which are us. We won't talk about the bacteria just yet. And that the cells have these wraparounds, and in eukaryotes, us, because we have a nucleus, plants are different, prokaryotes, but they have a cell wall, an exoskeleton, as POTUS says. But we have an endoskeleton. And the muscles are hanging on that. They're composed of cells, of which are soft membranes, which have a fatty surface on the inside and a phosphorylated surface on the outside. There's another conductor. So electrons want to get in and out of the cell, and the membranes are capacitors. So you got muscles, you got cell membranes. Inside these cells, 1 billion years or so ago, when the oxygen composition of the atmosphere of the Earth changed, some of the bacteria, the prokaryotes, were dying because it was mostly cyano-nitrogen atmosphere. When oxygen started being produced by the algae and whatnot, and it became 20% oxygen, these bacteria engulfed these other smaller bacteria that could take this oxygen-rich atmosphere and produce energy, and that's our mitochondria. So our cells living within us, half our body weight's mitochondria. That's kind of an amazing thought. And that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the electrons get converted into usable energy. So you have muscles. When you run around, walk around, creates these electrons and electricity. Then you have cell membranes, which allows electrical charges to come in and out of the cells themselves. Then you have within the cells these mitochondria that take all the food and things that we eat and digest and ingest and convert that to energy. And last but not least, our DNA and the way it's wound is called golden mean. There's a lot of information to unwind here, but it's a scalar energy source of the universe that is within our DNA. So there are 4 different energy sources right there, from large to small. And any disturbance along the way is going to create trouble. The beauty of this, if you can just put enough voltage into your body and in the right polarity, you'll heal. So the 5 factors of voltage: first, you have to have the adequate amount of thyroid hormone, and Dr. Lewis has talked about this forever. The T3 controls the voltage across the cell membranes, but the T2 controls the voltage within the mitochondria. And the key to the whole thyroid hormone, as you know, is iodine. And a lot of the issues we have with people with thyroid problems is that we have fluoride in our water and our diet. Fluorine likes that thyroid globulin with higher affinity than with the iodine. So if you've got fluoride,
I don't have any way to mute. I don't have any way to mute now that I'm on, not the host, just so you know.
Does that allow me to renew my car insurance? I missed that advertisement. Get back with me later on that. Send me the link to that.
You got it.
Anyway, the hormone, thyroid hormone is key. Iodine is the key to that, which means how do we ingest and absorb thyroid and iodine? You have to have a really acidic environment in your stomach. All the things that Dr. Lewis has been talking about, this talk today is just going to go to the end of the road. And what happens if you actually have a nice acidic stomach within which iodine, selenium, all your ions and minerals can be absorbed? What do those little guys do? And iodine's a real big component to tyrosine, which it forms GABA, which is the biggest feel-good hormone in the brain. So all these little chain puzzles, if you have a super specialist physician, he'll go, oh my God, your GABA level in your brain is not high enough. We need to give you more GABA. When in fact, walk back up the stream of ways and get the stomach acidic enough to put iodine and selenium to allow tyrosine to make GABA. Next thing, you have to have, anytime you have scars, we talked about that a moment ago, your fascia is an awesome semiconductor. It's like the wiring electrical system in your body that's non-neural. Now, you know, electricity travels in your nerves and so forth, but it's a different kind of electricity. It's an ion, biochemical electricity, not so much electrons. The fascia actually conducts electricity, but if you slice it with a scalpel blade, now you've disrupted the electron flow and therefore low energy. Third, dental infections. Dental infections are key to a number of things, one of which is when you're born and you look like a little shrimp. You've seen those pictures of us. We have a tail. So we're like 6 to 8 weeks. Each of our teeth, there's 32 of these little guys, are part of the electrical development of the central nervous system. And then as we grow and enlarge, then our teeth become localized, obviously, in the mouth, but they are still in the circuits of electricity. And so that when we lose a tooth or do a root canal, which is killing the tooth and leaving a dead tooth behind, it's a short circuit. And you can map out each of the 32 teeth. The wisdom teeth are real important, and we pull those in kids. It's just amazing to me when we do that. And then if you pull the tooth and leave a little tip of infection behind, it can create trouble. And they have emotional issues. And that goes forward into the next molar. The next molar is your spleen, stomach, meridian. That goes right through the adrenal gland. And you don't even know that these children, they're just teenagers. They have a low-grade infection in that premolar. That is short-circuiting the spleen, stomach, meridian. What does that mean? The adrenal gland doesn't work. When the adrenal gland doesn't work, the thyroid doesn't get messages. And also these kids sit around, they don't want to be fooled with. Without epinephrine, the adrenal makes these kids lethargic, they're irritable, they have attention span issues. You interrupt them to ask if they want mayonnaise or mustard on their sandwich, they're mad. Then they go back to what they were reading, can't remember anything. And then they become more and more isolated. And as we become adults and still have an abnormality of this spleen, a stomach meridian, we become adults that have these similar sorts of problems with our relationships and so forth. So dental infections are hugely important. And the other thing that happens with a dental infection, besides screwing up your electrical field, is Dr. Lewis tells us that glaucoma is Alzheimer's of the eye. On the top molar, often with unilateral glaucoma or macular degeneration, there's a dead tooth or an infected tooth. And so you can get elevated pressure in your eye, Alzheimer's. And then if the infection goes further north into your brain, we believe now that Alzheimer's is an infection. And it can be a herpes virus, or it can be bacteria from your teeth, or fungi. There's all sorts of things that can create this infection in our brain. And the way that you fight that off is you have energy, voltage. The next thing is emotions, very powerful. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it. It's very esoteric, but it's really heart-rending to hear the stories. They can take a tuning fork. There are folks that have the talent, and look at your energy field. It's 5 feet around you. And the outermost edge of it is your birth. And the centermost is you today. And anywhere along that path, like layers in a tree, will have a frequency. And when there's a frequency change, these folks can go, hey, something happened. You were about 12, 15 years old. And I've seen people reduced to tears. And I go, how can you know that? These energy fields have a vibrational frequency. And when there's a stop, those emotions can prevent you from being healthy because it disturbs how voltage can move in and out. When you walk past someone and have an odd feeling about it, your energy fields might have brushed by each other and you felt something coming from them. And trees have it too when you walk within 5 feet of a tree. So these non-physical, invisible energy fields are not nothing. It's voltage. It's electricity, and we're just a big battery when we're healthy. And the fifth thing is obviously toxins, heavy metals, pesticides, insecticides like glyphosate now finally is getting eliminated from the United States. It's been eliminated from China and Europe for 20 years. But those create problems in the brain. And when the brain is having problems with toxins, infections, low energy, whatnot, immune system starts to try to fight that, and the shotgun shells of its attempt to fight off those infections or toxins are tau proteins and amyloid beta proteins, which are thought to be the cause of Alzheimer's. They're not. They're the consequence of Alzheimer's. And now we're learning that these little proteins are sticky. They could act like prion, like mad cow disease. They could actually be contagious. So there's a lot of interesting information coming on. Again, what do we do, Dave? Electrons. How do we do that? Eat properly. Stomach's acidic. Make sure that your immune system and endocrine system is in sync, and that if you need these sorts of therapies, that there is energy treatments. We're using it for the brain to reset folks. Electrical synchronicity. Each lobe vibrates at a different 7 megahertz from the frontal lobe, 12 in the temporal, and so forth. We can help reset folks using these electrical little hats that you put on. So no needles, no drugs, whatever. So anything we can do to improve our energy, then we're going to be able to handle, we're going to be able to be capable of fending off all the activities of daily living, the toxins. Geez, we live in a sewer practically with our air and water. But a healthy body can ward that off. And we also know that when you have a sick capillary lining, that endothelium is where 100% of the physiology goes on. When Dr. Lewis is talking about take the selenium and do this with acidity and pH, all that is happening not in the heart or the aorta or any vessel you can name. Those vessels are sort of like the stomach. It's just getting the contents ready to be absorbed downstream, so that these main vessels go into the capillary bed and the blood slows to a near halt, and that's when everything, the magic happens. And if you've got a healthy capillary lining, you're going to be able to handle the infections, the trauma, all the things of daily life. And if you don't, we know now these folks with COVID, one is COVID hit someone and no problemo, and he hits another person exactly same age, sex, height, weight, and all that, and they are all sick and have COVID long haulers. They had a sick capillary bed to start. Like Dr. Lewis says, health and sickness is two ends of a 180-degree spectrum. We're somewhere in between. Hopefully, we're not sick. He says today, by the time they get to you, they're sick. And that's true. As a radiologist, by the time I'm taking pictures, you're not well. But there's a time in your life when you're not really well, but you're not sick, but your capillaries reveal that. And we have a system to look at the capillaries under the tongue. Dr. Lewis talks about the OCT test, where we look through the ocular coherence tomography of the eyeball, look at the capillary bed, which eyeballs a forward extension, outcropping of the brain. So looking at the capillaries in the brain, we can see your major organ, your 60,000 miles of capillaries, and we can see if it's got a nice paint job. And when it doesn't, we have really simple ways of restoring that without pharmaceuticals or things like that. So we are rechargeable batteries, but you have to have the correct polarity. This is beyond the scope of the talk today. We'll maybe talk about it next week, about how to recharge these battery packs. It's just like a rechargeable battery. Once you run it all the way down to zero, it flips its positive and negative poles. And you can't recharge it until you flip the pole back, then it's ready to recharge. I'm going to go to, we talked about the teeth, and why, how the teeth work as a short circuit. Just like around your battery, when you start getting corrosion, if it happens right at the pole, maybe it's just an infection under a cap, but when it starts to erode the cables, now it's into the jawbone, and that's when it goes into the brain and creates trouble. So we certainly can. Yes. Go ahead. Okay. Now, here's an interesting thing we can do. You can take this little biomodulator and hold it over the wisdom teeth, and it will repolarize and recharge all-important electrical field that has to do with emotion and things like that. This just shows that inside of all healthy cells in our body, the trillions of cells, ideally we need to be, if you could mute please, if you could, hey, you can go pick it up later. If you could mute though right now, that'd be good. When the charge inside the cell is minus 25 millivolts, that's ideal for a cell, for all of our bodies. That's how many electrons we need. And that when we start to lose the charge, and by the way, minus 25 millivolts is a pH of 7.4. That's perfectly neutral. So when we start to lose electrons, it starts to drop the voltage, 20 millivolts, maybe 10. When it gets to 0, the pH is 7, and sometimes the pH, the voltage goes to plus 10, 20, 30. That's when cancer happens. So a lot of the voltage issues happen because of the imbalance and the lack of electrons. So
David,
here's an example.
David, you can mute all if you want to do that, and don't worry about it. I'll come on later. Believe me, you want to send a copy of your X-ray to Dr. Harshfield. That's the that's the one you. That's the one you wanted.
I think it's the arrow right to the right of mute, Dr. Harshfield. Is it not, Dr. Lewis?
Yeah, well, I have no control anymore.
But you could tell him how to do it, right?
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that's it. The up arrow next to mute, David.
We don't want to miss any of this. This is
Mind-bending.
Amanda is going to control these things from now on. We'll just have to
Exactly.
go from there.
Oh, and here's the other thing too: is as the pH and electricity in your blood changes, the amount of oxygen that can remain in the bloodstream changes. So as we don't have a 7.4 pH, as it drops more acidic, you can't keep oxygen in the bloodstream, and the low voltage allows a lot of these infections. We know that most of us have Lyme disease, but as long as we get enough energy in the bloodstream and oxygen and so forth, those little spirochetes are stuck in the red cells. But you put a drop of blood on a microscope cloud with a cover slip, in a few hours when the oxygen runs out, you can watch these spirochetes run out of our red cells. So low energy allows the little microbes to play. But as long as our voltage is balanced and we have a high enough energy in our body, we're fine. It's just part of life. One of the things about not having enough oxygen that we don't think about maybe is that when our mitochondria are in there taking, say, a molecule of glucose, 6 little carbons and 6 hydrogens and some oxygen, the first thing happens when you eat this little sugar molecule in the cell, it divides it in half, and you make 2 ATP, which are batteries, 2 little battery packs. And if you have oxygen in the system, those 2 little 3 carbon molecules goes in the citric acid cycle, the Krebs cycle, and it turns a crank, and 36 more come out. So when we have oxygen, 1 molecule of glucose makes 38 of these little batteries, ATP. But when we're anaerobic, like when Dr. Lewis is riding his bicycle right before he falls off and hits his head, when he's anaerobic, you only make 2 ATP. So that's why we need oxygen. That's why we need the pH to be perfect in our bloodstream. That's why we need the voltage in our cells to be minus 25. And when a cell's injured and he wants to repair himself, he's got to have minus 50 millivolts to make the repairs. So we need even more energy. There we go. And by the way, Thomas, that looks like the creek water behind my house when I was a kid. I used to play with
No, the fulvic humic is flavorless, but it's brown.
Looks marvelous.
It looks like you're drinking dirt. Cheers.
Yeah. Now, in this slide up here, you can see in the bottom right-hand side, as the oxygen leaves this drop of blood, those are spirochetes coming out of the red blood cell. So low oxygen in the bloodstream equals low voltage, meaning the integrity of these cells begins to break up. And out come our little microbes, little bad guys.
You know, David,
Fungus.
that explains so much to me about how the pathogens reactivate. You know, Dr. Stratton out of Vanderbilt says that something like chlamydia pneumoniae, which is just a common pathogen very similar to your spirochetes, live in 3 different phases. And I've always wondered why they would go stealth, this so-called elementary body. But it's obvious that they're not doing it for their own for their own decision. They're being forced to do that because the voltage is, negative, and they have to stay in the cell, otherwise they shall die.
And that's how we start this autoimmune self-immunity attacking ourselves. A lot of the things, particularly chlamydia, like Dr. Lewis has said, they hide out inside the cells. The neat term to use at Christmas time or Thanksgiving is intracellular obligates. That's a great multisyllabic. Tell your friends how smart you are. These things have to live inside the cell for the exact reason Dr. Lewis just stated. They need that energy. So when they're hiding out in the cell and you try to say, well, I think you got Lyme or chlamydia, you draw the blood, measure it, nothing, because there's nothing in the bloodstream. It's intracellular. And so pretty soon your immune system gets smart. Those T cells, remember we talked about those a while back when Dr. Carter was talking about the different types of T killer cells. They know that those renegades are in your cell, and they're going to go in after them. And when they do that, they have to kill the cell. It's cytotoxic. So your immune system is trying to do the right thing and get the hostages and all that out of these cells, but it's attacking you because those microbes are hiding within you. That's how autoimmunity happens. And funguses take it to another level because they're so smart. And we talked, I think, a few weeks ago, funguses are who drug us out of the ocean. We'd still be pond slime. Without fungi, we would still be algae floating around in 2 dimensions on a pond.
For pity's sake, man, you're full of shit.
Oh dear.
Okay. Well, that could be. Absolutely.
I know I am.
We'll entertain that. So the point being, fungi, when they are hiding out in the body, they're sturdy. They're really hard to kill. Bacteria have cell walls, so antibiotics and things that your white cells secrete will kill a bacteria. Fungi are like we are. They don't have cell walls. So it's much harder to kill fungi. In fact, antifungal medicine is very toxic to us too, whereas antibiotics may give us a little diarrhea, so it can kill us. But fungi are part and parcel to how cancer becomes dissociated, and they live in these little colonies with biofilm to protect them. So again, going through all these little muscle battery packs, each of those little points correspond to points of the chakra, the quartz crystal, vibration, and so forth. We can measure them and take pictures of them now, but for centuries we just had to assume that the shaman priest and whatnot from China knew what they were talking about. But now we can actually measure it. We can see that their polarity is not correct for the sympathetic system, and we can reset the polarity and recharge it and help these folks. Autonomic, sympathetic, and parasympathetic is a really tricky part of fixing people. It's the on-off switches that we don't think about. I mean, if we have a stroke in the brain, or we lose a limb or have pain, we understand the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. It's the autonomic, the one that makes our heart beat without us thinking about it, makes us breathe. The limbic system, that's the part that's really difficult for us to deal with. And a lot of times, if you can reset the polarity of the sympathetic system, we have actually an injection we do now. You may have seen it on 60 Minutes for PTSD. We inject the sympathetic ganglion right at C6, transfer process, put a little ropivacaine, dentist office numbing medicine, and within about 3 or 4 hours, you have rebooted whatever it was in that person's fight or flight system that was making them think that it was still going on. And Mr. Vagus nerve lives 2 millimeters away. So we treat the sympathetic and parasympathetic, simultaneously reset them like rebooting a computer. And we've learned now that you don't have to necessarily use a anesthetic like that. You can use buffer glucose. When we talked about what glucose does, it breaks down to provide electrons, an energy source. So here's our electricity in our brain. There's a neural form of electricity we all know about. It's mainly ionic and formed by electrolytes and things like that. It does generate electricity, not like a wire in your house. Then there's another non-neural bioelectric field that we've measured. It's about 100 millivolts. That's pretty high, because remember, the cell is minus 25 millivolts. This bioelectric field is what redirects traffic. When you cut a salamander's leg off, his little bioelectric field's still there. And his stem cells will go to the nub and grow into another leg. And they've taken planaria, those neat little flatworms with the funny looking little heads, and they chop their heads off, and they put an bioelectric field that polarizes it to regrow two heads. And it will continue to do that for the rest of its existence. And these planaria are immortal. I mean, they can be killed, but they'll live and divide forever unless they are killed. The genetics of that creature was not changed to make two heads. This bioelectric field was changed.
Amazing.
So now we're working with frogs to regrow frog legs, because frogs are like humans. We don't regrow when we amputate our limbs. Maybe this bioelectric field, which is what? Electricity. That may be enough. Oh, one other thing, Thomas, I'm sorry. We are zapping the brain, resetting some of the dysynchronous waveforms in the brain, and we are helping to reset folks' memory. And it doesn't take 20 minutes. It's cool as all get out, and very safe. And here's the last thing I'll end with. George Washington, who died in 1799, we didn't know that there were dinosaurs until 25 years later. So George Washington didn't know there were dinosaurs. What do we know? What do we not know? I don't know a lot. I'll just say that. With that, I'll hand the podium back to Tom. I'll give you a thought. Here we go.
Dr. Harshfield, that was amazing. And I think that is, it's a great way to end it too, with that whole thing about not knowing about the dinosaurs. Like, we don't know what we don't know, but this story of electricity and how it is beneath all of the biochemistry. And I don't even know how do you have time to find out all of this? This is incredible.
Dr. Harshfield's been around the block a few times, but see, how do we train? And he's extremely modest gentleman, demure, and he's given talks all over the world and has interacted with the right people. I think David always says, he's had two careers. One where he's looked at the short vasculature, the big pipes, and he's then spending the second half of his career looking at the capillaries. Charles Mayo did the exact same thing. I don't know what he did the first half of his career, but the second half of his career was completely dedicated to looking at the connection between oral pathogens, oral health, and whole body health. But so look, what I do is pretty simple, and it's directly related to everything Dr. Harshfield talked about. And what I see, in 80% of you folks, whether you realize it or not, your gut is not in perfect shape. And if it's not, leaky gut attacking the thyroid, not absorbing minerals affecting your pH of your bloodstream, basic things. The best test I have is the erythrocyte sedimentation rate. Where's my dirty stick? Here's my dirty stick. So what I say about that is that if your erythrocyte sedimentation rate is perfect, 2 millimeters or less, in my opinion, you may only be 75% of the way to creating a perfect gut. If you get to an erythrocyte sedimentation rate of 2, you assume it's perfect. Probably not. I think you can have a fair state of dysbiosis and still have that perfect sedimentation rate. So you go by symptoms. If you have constipation or diarrhea once a month, that means you're, as Dr. Carter says, your vessel is partially full and it's not taking much for you to spill over. It should never happen. And people always say, it was just something I ate. Exactly. Because you did not manage that through your digestive process as well as someone with a better digestive tract. So we never neglect that. And then I suggest everybody do the oral DNA test. Why? Because I want you to waste your money. No, not at all. Because your dentists look at you as either healthy or sick, nothing in between, and even the cone beam X-ray will not be the kind of precision instrument. So you need to take control of the reins, have the power to be able to tell your medical community, dental community, whatever, hey, here's what's been found. Help me figure out what the source is, and let's treat that. So the two things I work on, 1, 2, 3. Oral, identify, rectify. And there's two parts to it. The faucet's leaking. Okay, let's find out where the pathogens are hiding. And 2, they've gone systemic. Let's treat those. Okay. Number 2 is nobody assume their gut is perfect. Okay, nobody assume their gut is perfect, and everybody should go on minimal a prophylactic treatment of their microbiome to expand the diversity, not the quantity. I believe at some point in the future the probiotic companies will get it right and stop bragging about how many CFUs of 4 different organisms they give you when a fecal transplant gives you 2,500. This is what we're trying to achieve. We're in our program, we're trying to mimic what a fecal transplant will do. And thirdly is if you're going to have all these other things rectified, then we want you to know what are the highest in nutrient density in terms of foods. So get as many nutrients as you can. So for example, Mercola played back Dr. Campbell's interview of was it Tyson or Tyler, this Uber athlete, and I explained why someone like that could have very severe long haul symptoms from COVID. But he talked about black seed oil. And I'll post a talk at some point by Jerry Tennant. And Jerry Tennant and I agree. I met Jerry. He actually went to a Mass Ioneer the same time Dr. Tremp was at Mass Ioneer a long time ago. But he says he doesn't believe in,
Is what?
He doesn't believe in the mono concept, okay? He believes more in, let's see.
Yuli.
I still don't.
Zumba class on some
I
days.
still don't have the power. Mitchell. He doesn't believe in mono supplements. He believes in, multiple things. That's why you eat food, herbs, spices, things like that. Black seed oil, hemp oil, anything like that would be, varieties of spice of life. All these simple cliches make a lot of sense. The only supplement, I do a little multivitamin. I do certain things to support my high-end activities. And I do cod liver oil because it has such a multiplicity of things. And the number one thing I'm fighting are the pathogens. And that's why cod liver oil, vitamin A. And now I'm suggesting that people with low lymphocytes, high white blood cells, high neutrophils, take some excess vitamin A for a while. But if you're worried about toxicity, one thing I recommend you do is you just pulse it. So that means you don't take a high dose of vitamin A every day, because it does accumulate in your fat cells, as you might take some high dose vitamin A every third day or something of that nature. So you're pulsing it. So what I'm trying to get across is that what Dr. Harshfield's talking about seems awfully esoteric, electricity and, putting microcurrents across your body. All those things I think are effective to amplify things, but you want to have a good baseline electrical conductivity and pH. pH and voltage are the exact same thing, just different scales, if you will. It's like metric and English. So we're ultimately, unwittingly for me, for years, until I met Dr. Harshfield and Jerry Tennant, I met Jerry Tennant some years ago, is trying to improve your voltage in a favorable way. I remember years back, athletes were worried about lactic acid, so they're taking tons of Tums, and their performance was being affected because it's not about acidity in your gut, it's about acidity in your vessels. and there's all different types of, see, even saying you want your pH to be, 7.35, 7.4, within a cell, you'll see all kinds of different pH domains. That's why, so how do you regulate that? You don't. God does, your brain does. But your job is to shelve your gut. Your gut should be Home Depot with every kind of nutrient, enzyme precursor, mineral, anything you can possibly get, and let your body do the rest. Then you get things like H. pylori. Everybody should be aware of something like that. There's no question that H. pylori produces ammonia, which is an antacid. So you need the strong acid to have the proper voltage in your cells. So these are the kinds of strategies. And someone may look at their labs that we run and say, hey, it's low. But if your gut is really in a state of disorder, then even a low amount of H. pylori producing ammonia is enough to throw you into to a state where you're malabsorbing at least something. And then the tests like Biome, if you watch the video that I send to most people in our program, and it's on our blog under simple problem, not so simple solution, the lady from Stanford and her husband and her team of about 12 people studying the microbiome, she says, well, I see these biome tests and things like that, and this is a world expert looking at it, and I see you have this organism, and this organism. But what about the other 1,995 organisms? So they don't put a lot of stock in it, and I don't either. Not that it's not a good idea to get more testing and more information, but all you can do. So the call before this one, and now I know her husband, so she can't get away from me. So she lives outside of New York and I guess in Pennsylvania, and they're going down to Ocean City. And I said, Judy, is Judy Jack on? Take your shoes off, walk into that ocean water. Don't look at nature as being harmful to you. And I want you to drink a teaspoon of ocean water to further populate your microbiome potentially with some organisms that you don't get exposed to every day. Just to increase just create exposure. You don't have to drink a gallon of water. That would be probably very bad for you. Too much salt, right? Maybe too much toxicity from pollutants. But seed that gut. Exposed. We're supposed to be like kids. That's why I like falling on the dirt. So I inadvertently take in more organisms that I wouldn't necessarily be exposed to in my clean room. Paul Ewald talks about, we used to live in caves. We still live in caves. They just happen to be made of sheetrock, okay? But the sheetrock, is not part of nature, whereas a cave is. We're being exposed to stuff. We swallow 1.5 liters of saliva every day. An organism sticks to it. If it's pathogenic, usually our body is designed to get rid of it. Strong stomach acid kills the organism. But the ones that are beneficial to us, for us, have adapted to the stronger acid. So your body will figure it out. Your body will figure it out. Someone says, anyway, that's my... So I love what Dr. Harshfield's doing about educating, and there are advanced wound healing techniques, and I think more importantly, advanced measurements to find out all kinds of issues that may be due to blood flow, structural issues, things of that nature that Dr. Harshfield's world expert on. But we're just trying to say, basically, prehab, what can we do to get your terrain set up to a fairly well so that you're more resilient? The number one thing, I see someone that says, they're constipated normally I'll look at the labs first and I see a high erythrocyte sedimentation rate. And the first question I'm going to ask them, do you bruise easily, and would you classify yourself as a poor healer? And 9 times out of 10, the individual says yes. Guess what? What are they lacking, Andrew?
Ability, diversity.
Voltage.
No, that too.
No, but it's all connected. There was no wrong answer there. So, if your towel smells like ammonia after a good sweat, what would that be? The answer is, I don't know, but curious. I mean, where is it coming from? I mean, the doctors test for ammonia for H. pylori using a breath test for ammonia. Okay, could be high enough to exude through the skin, possibly, but I mean, I don't think ammonia is. I mean, you may be mistaking it with urea, which is a metabolic byproduct. I mean, we do produce ammonia compounds. Urine, I assume, is somewhat alkaline, David. I haven't really looked at that recently. Of course, Edward Group just gave a whole lecture at the Truth About Cancer Live on how urine is actually very healing, but someone can look that up.
The interesting thing about urine is it changes pH about 3 times an hour. So it kind of comes and goes, and I'd get a BUN for sure, blood urea nitrogen, if your sweat is smelling like not something nitrogenous like that. Just make sure the kidneys are okay. But the acidity of the urine is really interesting. We developed a stent 20 years ago. When you put a stent in somebody that has a kidney stone in the ureter, they can't get urine past the stone. So before we can get to it, we slide a guide wire around it, put a double pigtail stent with side holes in the kidney and in the bladder so your urine can get past the stone. Eventually, your ureter gets tired and just lets the stone fall through. What we learned, though, is when we leave the stents in, they'd end up encrusting. But we found out that the urine was changing pH, so we developed a stent out of a composite material that would shrink and swell with the pH, and it didn't encrust. So urine, I tell you, the kidney is smart, and second only to the brain and what's going on with the CSF. But urine is real important, and urinalysis is such a simple test.
The kidney regulates blood pressure. I want to throw a couple of questions out so we get them answered, and I think this is a good one. If a thyroid test comes back normal and not sluggish, why are there solid nodules shown via ultrasound? Sounds like your kind of question, David, with imaging.
Like we talked about, a lot of the thyroid stimulating hormone TSH level can be normal because the thyroid hormone level's normal but doesn't have iodine on it. It's got fluoride on those 4 little pegs. So you don't really have an active iodine molecule. So now the thyroid gland's going, hey, we got to make some thyroid hormone. It starts generating, they start off as colloid cysts, and pretty soon they become solid like muscles. So you can have solid nodules with normal superficial thyroid tests, but when you get right down to it, a lot of that T3 is not really normal T3, it's reverse T3. But if you just look at the T4 level and TSH like I did in med school, I didn't know any better. They're normal, unquote, but they're not functional. And your thyroid gland knows that, and so it's lifting barbells. It's making nodules, mostly cystic, but sometimes solid. Rarely cancerous. We keep an eye on those. And usually that happens when you have an iodine issue where you live. Up in the northeastern part of the country, it's kind of selenium iodine deficient.
This is why I have to have Dr. Harshfield on these calls, because I never could have answered that question, so I'm really appreciative, Dr. Harshfield. But the reverse T3, if your reverse T3 is high, it's relatively, the presumption is T3 is not getting into the cell, or it's just not the proper, so it's a different configuration, and the cell membrane is smart. There's a gatekeeper that says, wait a minute, you're not the T3 I'm used to seeing. You're staying outside. So that's what reverse T3 is all about. Does anyone use or know about other devices that work with scalar energy other than Dr. Tennant's devices? Well, first of all, we're going to support Jerry Tennant, so get his device. But anyway, Dr. Harshfield, what do you know about that?
I think there are some, and this is worth a look. If you want to look at some links now, I'll send you some links to Dr. Robert Gilbert that talks about how this scalar energy was sort of first discerned, and it was 10 or 15,000 years ago. Most of the Egyptians knew about it. And a lot of this energy that comes from so-called the universal source is manifested in calligraphy, form, shape, frequency. Some of it is scalar energy that lives in our DNA. And I don't know of another system like this one. in which it's specifically the transducer does the scalar energy part to repolarize the battery packs and to put the scalar energy in you. Then the voltage comes from the biomodulator, two different little toys. The Rife system is really good because it's a broad bandwidth. It puts a number of frequencies, like if your liver's sick and it's 490 hertz, it's hard to get 490 hertz precisely vibrational to resonate in the liver. If it goes through the skin, the subcutaneous fat and all that, by the time it gets there, it's 400. So what Rife does, and Dr. Tennant, they have a broad bandwidth. And they'll anywhere from 350 to 600 hertz. And there's going to be some of that energy that will resonate with that target organ. And the cool thing is everything else goes right by. So it's harmless.
Do you guys know Dr. Bart Flick, silver nylon for wound healing? I'm going to take a wild guess that that's serving two purposes. First of all, silver is antibiotic. That's why we use Argentin 23. But it's also conductive, and maybe the nylon is enhancing electricity through that wounded tissue because you're basically in scar formation. Is that reasonable, Dr. Harshfield? Feel free to.
Yeah, I think probably the nylon scaffolding. A lot of what we need, like in spinal cord injuries, we were injecting stem cells into these transected spinal cords. Nothing was happening. Somebody got the bright idea, put some collagen scaffolding. Stem cells just need a bridge to walk across. So the nylon in that particular product could be a scaffolding that the cells can then start to hang on to and rebuild. And to your point, you don't want the M1 macrophages that scar, you want the M2s that restore. And then the silver, that's the best stuff in the world for burns and stuff like that for skin infection.
What I'll do is I'll put up Dr. Harshfield's talk today, but I'm also going to put up a talk that Dr. Tennant did in front of a bunch of physicists. That you know. Did I say Dr. Tennant? You know Jerry Tennant pretty well, don't you, David?
Yes.
Yeah. So the question would be, when would you use Tennant's device? Is this something a healthy person does every day, or is it only for wound healing?
I do it, and I do it for every patient. When they come to our clinic and their knee hurts and they want a stem cell injection of their knee, the first day I see someone, and I travel a lot, so I don't want to do anything of any great consequence in someone I don't know. So the thing I'll do is I'll evaluate them with the Jerry Tennant system and find out which of their systems are the weakest and say, okay, here's what we got to work on. They'll go on to Dr. Lewis's website and start getting their lab work ready for the prehab component. And I may do some glucose injections because it's a really innocuous way to get rid of pain. A lot of chronic pain is really below, a quarter of an inch below the skin surface. Not fractures and broken bones. That's a whole different kind of pain. This is chronic neuropathic pain. And these little shallow injections of buffer glucose turns the pain message off. So when I go, say, to Vegas, I'm seeing 100 people in a weekend, I'll take Dr. Tennant's system, start to talk to them and show them how you can understand that this voltage is off right here in your sympathetic system. It's spinning backwards. When I put the transducer on your head for 2.5 minutes, it goes forwards. And then I'm going to recharge you. You got headaches, I'm going to put some glucose injection in your trigger points and your TMJs. So now, today, you do not hurt and you have an understanding of why you need to go down this path. And that's sort of how I do that. And I use Dr. Tennant's system all the time personally. And also people that are needle phobic may go, you know what, I'll forgo the needle part today. I'll just do the Dr. Tennant thing. And it's amazing how well that relieves pain.
Well, we've reached 1 o'clock. We'll be doing this repeat on Tuesday. And then, importantly, a lot of people have run the oral DNA test. Next week, we'll have the oral DNA folks coming to chat with us. I think it's only Tuesday, but I'm not sure. But I've asked a number of questions of the corporate medical director. We'll play that presentation, that talk where he answers the 5 questions. And then we'll have Diane, clinical director at Oral DNA Labs, doing a short presentation followed by Q&A. That'll be next week. But if you want a sort of a repeat of this, we'll be doing this again, of course, on Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. So,
Hey, Tom, what about the electrical hat that Dr. H mentioned? Electrical hat.
Oh, I'll send the link to that. There's one out of Israel that's really cool. This one is from Aberdeen, Scotland. Great golf course, by the way. If you play from the tips, it's windy, you're in trouble. But at Aberdeen, they looked at this very simple, it's just an electrical transducer system. You sit the little hat on your head, and it just synchronizes your frontal, temporal, parietal, occipital lobes so that they talk to each other. Temporal lobe needs to talk to the frontal lobe. So what you're asking me right now is going in the frontal lobe. I'm hearing it. I'm going to store it in the temporal lobe, or I'm not. And by resetting it, the frequencies get desynchronous, and as we get older, they do. It synchronizes the frequency. So when frontal lobe says, I just asked about Aberdeen, Scotland, an hour from now when Dr. Lewis goes, hey, what was that question about? I don't know what it was about. And it's a very simple electrical. And by the way, it's alternating current. I saw a question mark about direct versus alternating. This device is alternating, although our nerves actually operate on an intermittent direct current, if you think about it that way. Any way that you can reset the body, if it's healthy, it'll remember that fix.
Where can you get one?
I need to call. I don't know the chairman over there. I need to call and find out what happened to that thing. And we were doing it for kids. Young kids got smarter. I mean, we thought, once you're, doing these 20, 30-year-old kids, the 70, 80-year-old us, and we got a lot better. They would show you like a picture of an accordion, and 3 seconds later, show you either that or something else, and you had to remember, was that the thing you just saw? And young kids did about 92%, and we did about 80, 82%. And then we put the little hat on, and we were right there with those kids. And then but the kids were not getting treated, by the way. So then we said, what if we treat the kids? Well, guess what? They got better. So no matter what age, we can always be a little better, huh, Tom?
He must be wearing the hat, Doctor. He must be wearing the hat. That's what it is.
Well, is the hat something like the Fisher, I think it's called Fisher-Wallace stimulator?
Oh, yeah. There we go. Yeah, that's transcranial. Some of these use electromagnetic ways of resetting it. This is an alternating electrical current. I think when we're doing electromagnetic, we need to be careful. That's a whole different creature. MRIs, stay out of those high-field MRs. It's like the first radiologists, remember, couldn't see x-rays. How bad could they be? And when they first started doing fluoroscopy, they'd come in the morning, put their hand under the fluoroscope till their skin turned red and said, okay, it's ready. And those are the guys I saw in the ER with no fingers when I was a kid walking through the ERs. So electromagnetic radiation is no place to be laying around. This electrical alternating current seems very safe to me. In fact, it's probably fixing the stuff that our cell phones and electrical appliances in our houses are unfixing. It's desynchronizing. But the electromagnetic hat that you're talking about, there's one in Israel. I think NASA's working on one. That is really cool. That's a little different level of sophistication.
Okay, I can't help myself. What about PEMF mats? The last question.
Absolutely. Pulse electromagnetic force. You can do it for certain body parts, so we've done that. But now that we know that we have a bioelectric field that's basically a ghost of us, why not just lay on an entire mat and repolarize everything and recharge everything? And these pulsed EMF mats are not very expensive. I think they're out. We tried to order some for our patients, and I think they're out right now, the version that we were interested
let me just tell you, so Dr. Tony Sincetta is a very dear friend of mine. He's a DO working at a couple of chiropractic clinics down in the Ocala, the Villages area. And his opinion on these ones over the counter, they don't have enough energy. But at some of these chiropractic clinics, they have much stronger systems than we have available to us.
I'll look into the link for that, Thomas, and show you the one that I think most patients, chiros, are advocating. And again, he's sold out. But I think that would be the way to treat. Why not? If you've got it's like we get so reductionist. Oh my gosh, you got a liver enzyme out of whack. I'm not going to treat your liver. I'm going to treat you. So if my shoulder hurts, I'm not just going to focus on all CMF for your shoulder. I'm going to recharge your whole bioelectric field because I got a feeling if we reset that, you're probably smarter than me. And why not do the big thing, particularly when you're using a therapy that has complication rate of 0. I mean, if it doesn't work, heartbreaker. Worst thing happens to our cell therapies and the things that we do, it doesn't work. But we don't make people worse, and I like that.
And just as a sidebar, Steve, I know you're out there listening. I think you're still on, but if ever you want to do a presentation and tell everybody all the different things you've dug into, because you've dug into more things than almost anybody I know, if not more. So I can't hear you, but if you're inclined to tell the Steve's help.
There we go. If you see me with my cannula on, I don't have emphysema or anything. I've got a new hydrogen machine. I was going to ask Dr. Harshfield about, because he talked about oxygen. I was going to bring up, well, what about hydrogen? Maybe that can wait till tomorrow evening.
Yeah, we'll wait for tomorrow.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
See, I have my own view on hydrogen. So
okay, tomorrow I'll connect an external camera there so I can bring it down to the machine and show you. It's the ACS-50 from Eagle Research.
Yeah, but I'm intrigued with all the different things you've worked with and tried. And what we can do is we can have a little banter. You say you're doing this, and we'll tell you why it's wrong. Just kidding. Or why it's right.
Hey, by the way, Thomas, you could use some hydrogen. That's what we use for traumatic brain injury in the early phases.
Okay, you're forcing me into it. Look, hydrogen is just another sacrificial anode. So I use cod liver oil. It's all about taking and it's all about taking one for the team. And you just want hydrogen to be able to be oxidized so you don't oxidize.
And don't worry about the Hindenburg, Steve.
No, I'm not. In the manual, they do talk about explosions, but it's okay.
Oh, the humanity!
All right, guys, we'll catch you. Another day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
For now.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Bye.
Have a good week.
Thank you for the great info.
Thank you.
Dr. Harshfield.
Amazing.
Thank you.
I will see you.
Thank you so
Great
much.
job.
Thoroughly enjoyed.